All right. Management Monday. Quentin, you're the first box.
All right. Let's see. So a couple interesting things. Last week, I did some usability testing on up2code, which revealed a couple of potential usability issues with the assembly line generally. And I've opened a couple of issues on our repository, but there might be some that we want to discuss. The other thing that might be good to talk about, although I could just do it offline, David, since you're across the hall, or we could wait till tomorrow. Just some of the solutions to some of the things with memory usage in FormFixer.
Yes.
You're going to have a lot of insight into it that I think, could save some time for this.
Well, it was all designed as for batch processes and not caring about that. So yes, there's probably a lot we could do. So yes, that can be another conversation.
And it's not necessarily our package that's the issue. We're going to try to make a pull request. I made a pull request this morning upstream to see if we can share the memory usage at least. That would be like the ideal.
Docker-symbol pull request?
No, to passive pi. Just to at least let us pass an LP object. Okay. I feel like that's a necessary predicate for us being able to do anything else.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I look forward to that conversation. Other thing, did you say two things? I can't remember. Maybe you didn't.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know. I could go through some of the usability things. Some of them were really interesting, and some of them were a little surprising. I don't know if I should just like jump right into those, or if we want to like kind of do a general.
Why don't we hold that off as a fun and exciting for our sort of stretch time, and let's see how much time we have before.
The one other thing is, David, you weren't on the call with Pew, but
oh yes,
just like some direction. So they had an interesting idea, which I think it seemed like too big for us to do before, but I think we can. We kind of landed from their encouragement on building a report for Michigan, which goes through some subset of their forms.
Here's some ways to prioritize.
And we basically come up with our take on which ones they should start working on using like the things we've discovered so far. And the more that we've dug into this like FormFixer stuff, I think we have like a way to do that, which is basically we take the readability statistic, which gives us, and I think especially the difficult word statistic that seems to be the most accurate, because it's just really hard to segment the text into sentences accurately.
That's right.
We know how fast people read on average. Caroline, you were just reminding me that like 120 words is like an average, right? So we'll have to figure out how to validate that, where that number comes from. If you have any links, Andy, that'd be great. I didn't try doing that research there. And then I think like this idea of like the time tax is like the most stable idea that we've had. So if we just say, okay, it takes this long to read it, now we just have to figure out how long does it take to answer the questions. So that's a factor of the number of questions and the type of questions.
Yep.
And I think that this framework from Caroline Jarrett is like really useful to me. I thought it was like the best way to capture that I'd seen, which is you have fill in the blank answers, or what she calls slot in answers, like things where you don't have to think about it, like your name and address. You just know the information and you have to type it. So it's how long to type. There's ones that require you to get information from somebody else. And there are ones that you have to create on the spot. So things you had no concept of until the form asked you a question, then you have to think and process.
Tell a story.
Build an answer about it. Yeah, like the tell a story one. And then the other thing that I have thought of is there's a distinction between short answer fields, where you have like one line to write it, and you can assume those are probably slot in answers. Checkboxes, who knows? Some of those are going to be created. Some of them are going to be ask somebody else. Some of them are going to be get the information from a third party. And then there is the long answer category where they're almost all created, but you probably don't have a good idea of whether the form gives you enough space to provide the answer the form wants you to give. So there's not like knowing the length of the field isn't really helpful, except knowing it's over 2 lines maybe versus 1 line. Once it's over 2 lines, is probably the same as if you had a page versus
Yeah.
half a page, because the form just might not give you the room it's supposed to give you.
I like all of that, and it jives a lot with what we talked about before, especially on the narrative answer part and the distinction between them and sort of the slot ends through other formats. So I think that's right. That could give us a rough difficulty scale or whatever we want to call it. The one thing that's missing is that as it relates to number of usage, right? So if the one form was like, this is a really difficult form, but only ever used by one person, then that's not the priority. So some way of normal, like multiplying that difficulty by the, percentage likelihood this is going to be used or something like that.
Are you talking about like just the number of people using that form in general, or are you talking about like optional conditional questions? That's like, oh, if
I think
you
number of
answered
people
C,
using it in general. That was my original thought, right? So the idea, like if we came up with a list of forms and we said this was the most difficult forms, in list of difficulty, the one at the top wouldn't necessarily be the one you want to prioritize unless it was also a heavy volume or a heavy traffic form. So you want
I don't think we have to. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I don't know if we have to do that work for Michigan, but if we just give them, I think what we want to do is like say, hey, here's where we're going to rank them in terms of
I think
most work.
This is one of the few times where we could actually just tell Michigan like, hey, we need this info, y'all should give it to us, because they probably have it somewhere.
Yeah, well, this was part of the call. This actually was part of the call, the last call with Michigan, was that information. And they don't have it maybe as granularly as we like, but they can tell us about like areas where there's the most. So like we'd be able to say, and I think that would be helpful because then you could prioritize within areas. So you say in family law, these are the most difficult in the list. The point is just to give it a little something more than, because if the idea is to create a priority list, you want to do a little more than just say, these are the most difficult. And just being able to, and we don't have to like entirely answer that, but being able, when we frame it, to give it to them and say, what you also need to do is add this layer for prioritizing. I think that's really important to get them thinking about.
Their information. I mean, so they would have the ability to run the report, but to do that, they have to be able to put in their own somehow enter some sort of frequency of use. The other thing that I think would be helpful is, are there certain big words that you don't want the form fixer to use in its calculations of difficulty? Because they're words that those words will alter the grade level of the form, but you need to use them because for whatever reason, and you may be able to talk around them, but you still need to use that word for what, I mean, it might even be, a legal concept. I mean, affidavit of indigency. So for example, don't use the word indigency when you evaluate the reading level of the form, So is there a way that you can include
So
that?
avoid using
like in
the
this
title
project.
type of thing?
Sorry?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, but I think there's room to say, like, I think what I tried out, experimented with, is just giving a percentage of difficult words. So it's not like saying don't use any difficult words.
Yeah.
Keep them under a certain percentage.
So the thing is, I don't want indigency to count as in that percentage. I want to know what that form is without the word indigency. So that as a user, I'd be able to say, don't include, when you're doing difficult words, leave these words out.
Quentin, I was going to say, when you're doing percentage, because I saw you doing this, but I didn't dive into enough. Is it the percentage of unique words on the form? So like of all of the different words used in the form, it's this percentage of them are difficult, or is it the number of usages of each word in the form? So if it's like indigency shows up 20 times in the form and it has 100 words, it's 20%. Is it the
It's not unique percentage. It's the total number of words and the total number of difficult words.
Okay,
Although I
actually
don't know how total number of difficult words calculated. It might not count duplicates.
That's
It's an interesting question.
Should probably check. But I don't know if unique words makes as much sense because you're not like reading it. I don't know. It's not how you read. Like if you a hard word you come across multiple times, it's still hard the second or third time.
Right.
I think what we can learn from the term frequency inverse document frequency is that the number of times a word is used does tell you something about the topic of the form. And so I think it makes sense to do it against the denominator being the total number of words as opposed to the total number of unique words.
Okay.
Because that does tell us something about how important this difficult word is, which is to say that like if it's a difficult word and used a lot, then it's probably going to be more difficult than if it's a other. That being said, I think these are all like we start to get like second order, like second pass stuff. Caroline, I like your point, but
second pass. But I was just thinking that having evaluated text for years.
Well, I think we start to get to a point where the amount of work needed to evaluate whether or not within the context of this form using this complicated word is or is not the appropriate task is beyond the scope of what an automated tool is going to reasonably be asked to do.
Well, I should explain too, like what I think we might end up doing, and this is like seemed impossible before because it was like 18,000 forms is too many to do this for. Q said take the housing forms and the family law forms.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, if we just limit it to that set, we could see if there are any patterns that tell us this is a slot in field, this is a created field, this is a ask someone else field. And then maybe we could start to build, then we could try that and then validate it with saying to the Michigan folks, hey, do you think that this ranking makes sense for that kind? Without, and like the hardest thing was like, okay, we know that some questions are easier and harder to answer based on the subject matter, but how do you figure out the subject matter of the question?
Yeah.
Is this framework of created, slot in, ask somebody else, third party question, is that like gonna be a good enough proxy? We don't really need to do the subject analysis for each of those ones.
Yeah, what heuristics can we build around the question types that would help us bridge that? I really like that idea. I think that's a great idea. I think that's a conversation more for our other meeting for us. But I like the fact we got some input from Caroline there as to some thoughts.
So
Michelle,
here's
do you have any?
One more thought on that. Just because it can distort these difficult words, they can just completely distort text. Can you, if you are going to use that difficult word analysis at some level, can you give the report runner what those words are? Because that's the other way to
I think so.
Information.
I think so. Yeah, and we're using this. It's basically the Dale Chall word list we're using right now, and the implementation that we're using, I think I want to switch away from because I found a different one, someone who had re-implemented it that seems to have done a better job of like.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dale Chall. I mean, I'm not pushing to use my list, but I put to have that vocab list that are reading grade level words up to 8th grade that are from some teaching reading books. And I saw something else, but you're saying you're using something else, right? Other than Dale Chall.
No, it would still be Dale Chall, just like not the same implementation that I started with.
See.
But what do you, I just wanted to say like one idea there is that there's words you have to use even if they're hard. But actually in Michigan, that's not their goal is to improve readability, and they have the ability to change the forms and to change potentially like recommend statutory or rules changes to go with it. So like indigency is a terrible word to use. Why is ours not just called fee waiver like it is in every other state?
Right.
There's no reason it has to be called indigency. I know that was just an example, but like I think a lot of those examples might be ones.
Most states don't use the word indigency. That was the first thing I could think of. Because also you're thinking about a form word rather than text.
Yeah, I think the key thing is to keep in sight the use case here, which is really we want to provide a triaged, ordered list to help someone do a triage task.
And then from there, we do want to like say, hey, this will help us validate our tool. But like the first way is to try it on a real list of forms.
Yeah.
Say, does it seem valid on this list of forms?
Yeah. So I think that's a reasonable approach. There's more nuance I'd like to cover when we're not recording and talking about stuff involving the parties involved. But yeah, we can table that for the appropriate venue. All right. Okay, so anything else, Gwen?
No, yeah, we'll circle back to those if we have time, the other two ideas, but yeah, that's it. Yeah, that was all the topics.
All right, Bryce.
For management-y things, I think mostly just a thought that occurred, given this feels like it's not the first time that this has happened, of we suggest someone use install the PyPy version of a project. Oh no, the PyPy version of the project does not have this feature that we added 2 weeks ago. We thought we had released. If it makes sense to, I think I could try to modify some of these. Essentially, I'm trying to figure out if there's a better way to actually do releases to PyPy. And I think there's, through other conversations I know I've been having with Michelle about how to sort of handle this in Kiln, there could be better ways of handling it, essentially on a PR, or it's not better, but different ways. I could essentially, long story short, the thing I'm leaning towards is maybe on new PRs that are merged, we just automatically release, and trying to figure out versions would be something we would have to do better, especially if it's something like assembly line, where we might not be able to do this on assembly line or some of the other projects that are need versions. But for the dashboard and for other projects, we could maybe switch to date versioning, where it's just, the version is 2022 10.03 for things that we released today. But mostly, if that makes sense, and if we're okay with releasing faster, and even if things have more bugs and more places, it might just make sense, given we are mostly, depending on how many people are working on things, 3 to 4, sometimes 2 to 3 on per most of these projects. And so I don't know if it makes sense to do just release quicker, even if there are more bugs in place, and more bugs on the PyPy version, which sometimes I feel like we try to treat as that's the thing we know doesn't have bugs. But yeah.
That's a really interesting question. I don't know. So I guess the question is do we want to have every pull request be a new version, or do we want to maybe try to bunch a couple of new features into a new version?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is all just process, right? So.
Yeah, sorry, just you bring up the processes. Yeah, I guess the key part to say out loud is the fact that the process right now is to go 2 or 3 screens into GitHub and make a new tag, and it still is easy from there, but it's that's the part of the process that gets left behind a bit. And it's fair, because I do it a lot too, because I just don't know, are we ready for release? I don't know.
Well, there's an interesting question, is there an in-between, right? Is there a forcing mechanism that we need to put in place to have people evaluate as to whether or not they want to do the add the tag effectively? I guess the problem is that right now the tag, I guess if the statement of the problem, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the current process, which involves the creation of the tag, which then which then releases to PyPy, has gotten us to a point where sometimes we don't have the version we think, the most up-to-date version we want in PyPy. I guess the other secondary question is that something that is it that we don't know that we didn't do that, or we forgot to do that, or it was hard to decide when to do that? Those are all different situations with different possible solutions.
That's a good point. I feel for me, sometimes if I do think about it, it starts off of, I don't know if we want to release yet, and then that very quickly turns into, we just forget about it until we need to update it again.
So we
usually for someone else, we're updating it for someone else. So
right. So that's the type of thing where something like some body like the deep dive or this meeting could periodically assess change logs and say this now warrants a release. But I don't want to I don't want to, overly overly burdensome like processes if it's, but I also don't want to like necessarily just make something that's going to maybe break some people's experience if they're updating all the time. And then Michelle had something she was very patiently waiting to say.
Well, I was going to also say that maybe the decision process is the bottleneck here.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that maybe hot fixes can be released. Like if there is a bug, like there have been some times where Bryce has said, I fixed that bug in a previous version, but we never released it. Maybe when there's a specific bug fix that we can just decide as a group that that's always released.
Mhm.
Yeah. I wonder, what about like just doing a monthly release as a plan for all
I
of
like
the core
that.
packages? We can say close to the first of the month, there'll be a new release unless we have a hot fix or there's a specific reason to make a new feature available right away. Like if it's holding up the release of something into production, for example. Like if it's one of our partners who needs this new feature, we could release it earlier.
Yeah.
Or maybe a month is too infrequent. Maybe we want to do bi-weekly. But I think like having a schedule will just make us check it.
I think that's right.
That schedule
I
will
like
work.
this idea.
I don't know if, it's one of those things, but I don't know if that would have solved the few times particularly this has popped up, because I think the change you had just made to the dashboard where like you don't need the API key, which was what we just ran into in the previous call, you made that change like 2 weeks ago. And the last time I remember this happening, it was also like a change we had made 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I think it was to the assembly line main repo package, and it was something that Matt had wanted. But I still think I sort of agree that that's probably the best time to consider things like that. Is like near whatever our first meeting of the month is, just have the quick, here's the list of packages. Has anything changed? Do we want to make a release? So.
Yeah, you're always gonna.
I mean, people are going to be behind the latest stuff we've done on dev unless we do it right away. But it feels like there is a little value to not releasing every change.
And I like schedules. There's something people can, at least for a forcing mechanism for us, I like them, because then it's like, did we do this month's thing? And then it's sort of catch-alls. And yeah, you're not going to catch everything unless you do an evaluation on a pull request by pull request basis, but we think there are problems with that too. So I think the only question is how often the schedule, but I love this idea.
Most packages seem to have a schedule, like they don't release for every patch. It's they group them together and say, this is a release.
Well, it gives
like the thing we're missing is like, we're not doing really an extra quality control check
when
we decide this is a release, really,
well,
are we?
Except that with the schedule, you've got that it's been lasting for however many days without breaking things.
Right.
Right.
It's true.
So there's something in there. It's just not formal, or not very formal. All right. Well, as the technical lead, Quentin, I think you get to make the call on how frequent those schedule should be.
Just having a cadence of once a month will probably help us make sure we don't forget a package forever. So that feels like it's reasonable.
Right.
And we could build it in like, we're going to run that version history report and just see the version numbers and how they compare. Maybe. Or maybe design one to help with that.
Yeah, that's stuff that we could do that could be like a very quick script that would run like at the beginning of the meeting. So
okay. So we won't miss the like more obscure packages. That's the other.
Sorry, I think I spoke over you, Michelle. What were you going to say?
I was wondering about the hot fixes. I'm curious.
Yeah, we would just
what
release
the full
those.
policy is. Yeah.
We would release those when they came out because we don't want to let people be stuck with a bug. The point is just to have some forcing mechanism to say, yep, these are enough changes.
When you
justify a new version.
So with the hot fixes, I'm just thinking about the people using, so it would be grant partners and students. Do you make an announcement? Because say the person who, okay.
Yeah, we make an announcement on that's scheduled. That's an automated thing right now.
Yeah.
Usually.
I was going to say depending on one of the ways you can make a release. It's an announcement. It's been on my backlog for a while to like, if you release it the way we're trying to release more things, it'll also make an announcement. And I just need to do that. So.
All right.
Because so I mean, guess I was thinking, who was asking about that? It was Emily, right? Asking about that this morning. When do you update? So you may not realize that somebody else had an issue that you guys, another partner might have had an issue. You don't have that issue, but then, so you said that there's a way for people to know that that was fixed, right? Okay.
All right.
Right. Yeah, people can see the change log at least and see if it's something they want.
Okay. Bryce, anything else?
I don't think so.
Anything relating to?
Yeah, relating to some management stuff.
No. All right. And things are, I just use this opportunity again to say, to the extent that the stuff that's going on with Illinois will one day not be sui generis, which is to say that we hope we will do more of those. If there are policies or procedures or things that we need to sort of implement to help with those processes in the future go smoothly, those, are
Bryce, you don't understand. What he's
appreciated.
saying.
Are you talking about e-filing processes?
Yeah, e-filing, yeah. Like if there's anything that I know right now you're just working on the e-filing, but if we step back and think about the e-filing in Illinois, it's not just a one-off, but as like the future. I know we've talked about this before. I just wanted to take the opportunity to say, to the extent that management should, there are questions that should weigh in that would make those future ones easier. I just wanted to flag that.
That's fair. Yeah. I don't, I guess I don't, there's general documentation. I'll think about it. There's general documentation stuff that I can do that'll make it better. And I don't think there's any process questions. I think the thing that is taking longer at this point is just the combination of clerks want a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And where existing e-filing is a lot harder because you have to take in combinatorial new different states that everything can have on the existing form. And then also Matt wants to make sure we're doing the right thing and making sure we want to have everything's good and exactly as we want it. So yes, that's just the reason it's taking long. I can't think of any process things that would make it go faster, but I'll keep it in mind. I'll think about it. So.
But yeah, I mean, if it's that we need to have an advanced team that sits down and helps acculturate new members to you're going to need people who can answer these questions. If you're going to, beyond, just, this is the process. All right, Caroline.
I don't think I have anything.
Michelle. And Michelle, I think I saw a thing in Teams, which I hadn't got a chance to respond to yet. I think the design challenge is just for law students, but you'd have to check the official rules to be sure.
Okay. I mean, I assume that's where it's linked and stuff. So maybe I'll check it out. Got it.
All right. Well, in that case, my only thing was since the last time we met, maybe I was on a Michigan call. Not, no, we've had a meeting since then where we talked about it because you were on that call too, Quentin, and and that was before. No, was it after? I don't know. Well, you just updated on a bunch of Michigan stuff, so it seems like it's there. One of those things was we were discussing.
You stuff, yeah.
Was discussing, where we're going to get the numbers and stuff, and what numbers to get. All right, cool. Well, then I guess that's management. Oh wait, no, it's not, because I had something specifically I wanted on the agenda that I mentioned.
And we want to circle back to the usability questions. And wait, what's everything I said? We just didn't want to do that up front.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we need to go into all the usability questions, but we can touch upon the top 5 or 3 or whatever. My point was, I suspect, Quentin, you're probably in the same situation where you're starting to have students who want to pick projects, and the question is, do we have we always talk about, should we have a curated list, or do we have an inkling of where we want students to choose projects from? I know we have a student in our lab class who has actually looked at the sort of state of existing things out there, which is useful. It might be useful for, at least one of my students is an experienced DocAssemble person who would work with us over the summer. So they could maybe, for them, it might for a small subset of students, it might be appropriate to take something that already exists and bring it over the finish line. But I think for most of them, we'd be looking at something started. Do we have an inkling of where we should be pulling from?
Yeah, so the way that I think we talked about this before this semester started, and what I've been doing with my students, because most of them are in the process of choosing their forms too, and a good third of them have chosen a form. As I pointed them to the full list of forms on the Form Explorer. I said, hey, think of a topic area that interests you, explore the forms that are there, look for something that has like up to 10 to 15 unique fields, things that aren't like the name and address. So that's basically the heuristic I use. And then like sometimes they're running into wanting to automate something that someone's already automated. I'm like, and I say, hey, that's okay, because this is a learning exercise for you. Just so you know, someone might have done it, can't literally copy the exact thing that they did, but you can work on it independently at the same goal. And actually, I don't know if someone's directly done the exact same project yet, but it did make me think I really want to work really hard this semester to make sure that people explicitly say, yes, this can be improved and released in the future when I'm done, and I'll try to make sure to collect those at the end of the semester. But yeah, no triage on our side, because I think it's just too big of a task. But what might be nice is a list of, here are the forms that have already been done somewhere to go along with my list, just to help people with that part of the conversation.
Yeah, it might be nice to do well, that plus maybe Ian's list. Here are the ones that are out there and published. Here are the ones that someone had started on. Just so you know, not necessarily because you want to pick them up where they left off, but these are the things people had started to bite off.
Yeah, and for my students, like I think they really can't jump into someone else's project that's been started. They have to do it from the beginning.
There's only one student I have who, well, it was Ryan from the summer, and I would trust him to be able to take something across the finish line if he needed to, but I'm not sure there's anything that's at the appropriate space for that. All right, well, there we go. I'm satisfied with that as an answer. I just want to make sure no one had like things that they were desperately wanting someone to work on.
The one, sorry, I didn't unmute in time. I don't know what happened with the pet form for the 209A. Somebody started that ages ago, and I don't think that got finished. I think that's pretty easy. I think there was some complication about the names or what kinds of pet. There was some problem with it that made it a little bit more challenging, but that would be a nice thing to get finished and then include in the 209A package. I mean, have standalone or include it in the package, or both.
It's a good idea.
It's easy to forget, and we saw numbers that indicated how useful and important that is.
All right. Well, that was my big thing. Like I said, I just didn't want to I want to make sure there wasn't a pile of forms sitting somewhere that people desperately wanted someone to work on. And I'm sorry, Caroline, only Massachusetts forms. Although, it really doesn't have to be, actually. Once you get started up and you're really taking in DACA symbol forms, we actually, I take it back.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I've got, David, I said on Friday, I'm doing the minor name change form for Alaska. It's 5 pages, so for some reason. Well, I know, because you have all the parents, and then there's anyway. So I want to get that ready so that, like, as you requested, so that when we're ready. Well,
I didn't necessarily request that you do it. I just said that's what I think someone's going to ask.
You suggested that it would be helpful, so there's only me,
about it.
And it was nice. I mean, I had a break from other stuff.
The one thing that's going to happen is they're going to, I don't know how this is going to go out. Well, they're going to want to do their, like, this common name change form that everyone's going to use. So it'll be interesting to see.
But not for mine, probably, right?
I was hearing reluctance on Alaska's behalf to be part of that. So if we can get their own, show them how they can do their own one, then that would be terrific. Right.
And it could be that their own one, it just also follows the standard if you're going to do the form. I'm assuming that the standard will make sense, but
I have a feeling that the standard will be less standard than people are imagining it will be. That's just my suspicion,
Mhm.
which brings up all sorts of interesting questions about interesting questions. Anything? Okay, now to Quentin's design bits.
Oh, yeah, the thing, usability stuff.
Yeah, and I've just really selected the top 3 things that seem like they're upstream issues. So it was really interesting to do. We just did like three tests with a variety of tenants. 73-year-old woman, a middle-aged man, and then a younger, well, someone around David's and my age.
Another middle-aged man.
Middle-aged. We'll call that middle-aged too.
I don't know. From the life tables, I'm squarely there.
Yeah.
What? Just out of curiosity, were these on desktops? What was the setup?
We had a mix of people on laptops with smaller screens than I had, which was really good to be able to do. We had one that we did on an Android phone, and then the other one was I wasn't participating in that one, so I'm not sure the size of the screen, but it was, I think, also a laptop or desktop. But yeah, it worked pretty well to do the Android screen sharing. You do the same thing on iPhone. We just didn't happen to have someone with that device for us to test. One upstream issue, which I think Jonathan may fix, is the way that the screen jumps to a particular place that you can start typing your answer on mobile, which I think is just a bug. So that was I think a significant problem. The person ended up being able to figure out how to use it. So maybe I'm overestimating how significant it was. But when I saw it, I was like, wow, you could just totally miss that field and not know how to answer it correctly. They happen to scroll up and see the context, but the problem is it jumped you right down to where you start typing and you miss the context of the screen.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
This was really interesting. We had 2 different people when they were using, no, one person did this problem actually. When they saw the name field for their own name, they typed their full name in the first name box, and then they typed their last name in the last name box. So it ended up being like first name, last name in the documents. And I think that might be fixable by just getting rid of the word name. So that's not the closest part to the input, and just having it say first, middle, last, because then the prompt is a little bit closer to where they start typing. That was on a desktop. So that was an interesting one.
Did you ask somebody why they did that without making them feel like they did it wrong?
Yeah. I was gonna say, I'm actually super sure about how these usability or the tests were actually done. Did y'all get to actually talk to them afterwards, or was it sort of just like they filled it out and y'all watched them?
We were watching and having them narrate their thought process aloud. So they read the screen and then they made that mistake. So I think I did not follow up with them on that specific one because I didn't want to interrupt their flow. But they were surprised by the fact that it wasn't, that they hadn't filled it in correctly later. They're like, why is it calling me first name, last name? So that was a 2-hour usability session. We let them go on. There was someone who was a little bit very detail oriented, and they wanted to use it to actually document their real situation. So in a lot of detail. So I was hesitant to slow things down more than they were. With that, this isn't going to be the end of the usability test. We can do more, and we can do our own as well on the assembly line side too. But that's just something to think about, how important we think it is to have it spell out first name, middle name, last name versus just first, middle, last. That might help. This was a really interesting one, I thought, because 2 people made this mistake. We got to a question that said, what is your landlord's name, as the heading on the screen? And then it had our standard input that lets you choose between, is this a person or a business? So they could follow up to put in the name in 4 parts or in 1 part. And 2 people out of 3 put their own name in again. Because I think when they saw this text, is this a person or a business, they thought it was referring to them. Even though this came much later in the interview, we'd asked for their own personal name up front. and this was the landlord's name, and it said that clearly on the screen. They just interacted with the radio buttons right away, and then they just totally forgot that this was asking about a landlord and not themselves.
So could you say they've already entered the name, right? They haven't entered the landlord's name.
This is the question for the landlord's name.
Yeah, that was the situation where it happened, but it does make me, yeah, it's like, I think a wider usability issue with that radio button, like because where it's forcing the choice and then where it asks for the follow-up information.
Maybe
And there's
is the
people-
party a person or a business?
I don't think that would help here because
Okay.
I think
they're a party too.
the idea is I think you have the right idea, Michelle, but it's that we just need to make it so it's, I forget what in DocAssemble this is called, but like the name of the variable. I don't know. It's not instance name, but it's like you can.
It is
Yeah,
instance
we
name.
could.
Or
Is it-
intrinsic name. It's called intrinsic and instance name in different places.
Okay, I was gonna say instance name. I think includes the whole like landlords, 0, etc. But yeah, intrinsic name. And so I think if we just changed this to be the intrinsic name, that might be a bit better. I guess this, in hindsight, yeah, this is just not very good. I feel like I've had the inkling of this I've had the inkling of this problem specifically because I've been running into, or I on the supplement, the affidavit supplement, where it gets kind of complicated because you're starting to use this same question for like the employer, like your employer and like your household's employers and stuff. And so it can get pretty complicated.
So if you're saying intrinsic, is that where you use the variable to refer? So you've given, how does this, I remember, is this a person or a business, but I don't remember the flow. So you say, what's the context of, is this a person or a business? What's the question before that? Or
I'm assuming it's a standalone page, right?
It's its own page. Yeah. It
Yeah.
says, what is your landlord's name? So it says, hey, we're going to have some more questions you need to fill in the rest of the form. And then it
All right.
says, one of the questions is, what is your landlord's name?
and that's what I'm saying. So you ask, what is your landlord's name before you ask, is this a person or a business, right?
You want me to pull? I can try to pull it up.
That's what because I mean, and maybe is this a person or a business is a regular, I mean, is a question other times. Because yeah, the tenant,
So this is where you get asked for your name.
yeah.
That's an easy one for people to
Yeah.
figure out. So this is what happens on mobile, by the way. Like it scrolls down
Goes right to the text, yeah.
to where you can see this text box without the label anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So
Right.
people, yeah, I was like, how do you know what you're supposed to fill in this box? You
Right.
don't.
What's
Here, this one should do it. I mean, I think we've seen this question before in other interviews
yeah,
too.
that's what I'm
but-
trying to think about.
So here's the question. Oh,
Right.
actually, no, it doesn't show. I do not know
Oh.
my landlord's name on this. Depends on the branch the person takes.
Right.
Sorry.
So if you go back to, and I think, and this is what your solution is, instead of saying this, is your landlord a person or a business?
Right. I
Right?
think, yeah, here we go. So here, what is your landlord's name?
Oh, I see.
Person saw this screen, they clicked on, they didn't read it, because that's typical. People don't usually read headings.
The
They jump right to the
heading.
fields they can interact with. They saw, is this a person or business? They clicked person.
Right.
Then they got this follow-up where it shows the name fields. It was actually not on mobile, it was on the desktop.
But I mean, it does make sense in this question. I mean, sorry, not this question, in this interview to say, is your landlord a person or a business rather than, I mean, anytime you can be concrete instead of using this is a good rule. But what if, I mean, I guess there may be other interviews. I'm just trying to think in family law. You wouldn't, I mean, where else would you ask if somebody's a person in employment questions?
Well, all kinds of housing cases. Anytime where there's like other parties that you're adding that aren't the person you're suing. So any kind, like a lot of civil cases, there could be a business or organization that's one of the parties.
And I'd say the time where this really we'd have to think about not using the intrinsic name would be like when your DocAssemble variable is named weirdly or not like meant to be like seen by the user, because that's the core of the issue of like you could change that label. I think we let people. I think that's a label people can change right now, but it's but like you would like being able to change it for, you'd have to change that for each of them, or like in your own program. Oh, if we're talking about users, always say like this, like say something else. Or if it's like landlords, always say landlords. And this is just trying to make it more of the default of the better question. And so
But
I
wonder if there's a way that you can let your developers, that you can point developers to this so that this is a placeholder, and depending on the interview, they would replace it. I mean, it seems it's so different from any other questions that we ask.
Well, another point, which I think I was making to Bryce too, right? So like there's a place where, yeah, it was a person or a business, which is the name of the employer on the fee waiver form, but we never cared about the person being in 4 parts. So we could just use one field for everybody. It didn't really matter whether we called that a person or a business, because we did not do anything with that information. And I think that would help 2 of the problems that I just described, right? If we just had one input for the name.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, you could say, what is your landlord's name? And then put in, is that what you're saying, right? Name, doesn't matter if it's a person or a name. You're going to put in one. Oh, no, because your landlord, you want first, middle, and last. And you're saying that for
Maybe
our
we don't
forms,
care.
you need the full name. You probably rarely need one of those names.
Well, all the time we use someone's first name, but we could have 2 questions. We could say preferred name. We could say, what is your name? What do you want us to call you?
But that's for that's for the user. I don't know if you need a preferred name for the landlord.
No, I don't think you do for the landlord.
Yeah. And we're not.
And then, but the challenge is like, how do you go from somebody's name in 4 parts? If you ever do need to do it, like,
Right.
I don't know that we.
I'm trying to think also noting, I was going to say for the one situation I had run into on the affidavit supplement, you were right. We don't ever really use it. We don't need the 4 parts. For e-filing stuff specifically, you do need to know, like you need to e-file it differently based on whether it's a business. And so,
okay.
Which and I don't know. It feels like it still felt like it was the right way of this is the question that determines if something's a business or not. And so I don't know if it makes sense to split it back up again to have it being something's a business or not separated into a completely different question. Like maybe it would make more sense to have this be, is your landlord a person or is your landlord like a corporation or a business? And then that's on a different screen. And then having the next screen could either be like, depending on the interview or the context, just be fill in the, like only fill in the first name or only fill in like one name. We only need the text we only need like the 1-line name of whoever it is, no matter what, if we still want it like that. And we think it makes it easier, but.
Okay.
And again, that feels like it depends on interview and depends on context. And so I don't know if it's super general or a thing we could try and fix. And
I mean, it's more natural, isn't it, to say, what's your landlord's name? And you put in either their name, if they're a person, or, I mean, in conversation, you wouldn't ask, is it a person or a business first? You'd ask their name first, because you would know from what they said what it would be. Or you could say, is such and such naturally,
sounds like a
say, what's their
question.
name? They'd give you the name, and then you would say, are they a person or a business? Just to be clear. Let's say it's Edward Jones, right? And is Edward Jones a person or a business? So
what name do you write the check to?
Pardon? Yeah.
What name do you write the check to?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, we would ask for, in conversation, we'd ask for the name first. And then you would say, is so-and-so a name, a person or a business? That's the natural flow. The problem, I guess, is that if it's multiple names and they say it's a business, we can't, if it's multiple names and they say it's a person, we can't break the string down into these names and assume that those are the corresponding first, middle, and last. How about if we do this?
Exactly.
What if we say, okay, what's your landlord's name? And they say Caroline Greystone or Seaver or whatever. And then is this full name a person or reuse? Is this person a person or a business? And if they say person, then you give them back the first, middle. Is this right? First, middle, last name, something like that. Is the person first, middle? Are these their first, middle, last name? Something like that. And they can say, yeah, it's a review, but we've split it up for them. And they say yes or no. If they say no, they correct it.
Let's make sure. I just want to confirm one thing. When e-filing, if you say it's a person, do you need to give the name in separate parts, or can you just give it in one part?
I think I am giving it in separate parts. I don't know if you need to. There's probably some way of encoding it that you don't need to, but it also probably breaks everyone because SOAP is a mess. Which is beside the point.
But if it's a person, oh no, that's not right.
If it is a person, in most cases, there are parts of the interview or other parts in places where we're probably assuming that it'll only show the first name or only familiar, which I guess familiar is a thing we actually have for businesses too. Maybe that's
well, but in e-filing specifically, not in the way we do the rest of the form.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Yeah, e-filing right now is you need it in multiple parts. Whether or not you need to, I don't know, but it's difficult to test because there's a standard, but I don't think anyone cares about the standard. So.
Yeah, it's this is the thing we decided early on was we knew it's better to ask for someone's name in one part, but that there were going to be some business rules that stopped us from doing that. And the easiest solution was just asking for it, the lowest common denominator. But I was also just thinking, as we were talking, there are actually a number of forms where we refer to the other party by first name. In the 209A, we do that extensively.
Mm. But we don't ask if the other party is a person or a business.
True. That's true.
I mean, that's what I'm saying.
That is what makes it harder, you're right.
What other kinds of cases that because you could always, if the question only occurred in housing, you could always say, is your landlord a person or a business? Right. And then you could do it in this less natural way. But if there are other interviews, the other thing I think is, debt collection, right? If you're going to do debt collection, it might be a person, it might be a business. And so then you'd have to use that. But it would be so cool to be able to use the name. Ask the name first. Is the name a person or a business?
Yeah, it feels like we could still do that to meet Bryce's goal. And then I guess the question is, are we okay with how we split it up for their behalf or not? There's a good package I've used to do that. It's going to not be 100% accurate. It might be 95% accurate. And is that okay? As long as we don't delete any information the user provided.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's never going to be enough accurate, I think. And so I think we just need to have a good fallback to letting them edit it. So
we think we always should show that to them if we do split it. But what if we don't use, we just have to think carefully about whether we want to really force that on them if we're just going to split it back into one line on the form.
Yeah, it's not a thing we need on every form. It would be a thing we would need on select forms if there's separate things on the form that needs it, or if there's separate e-filing rules that need individual names split up.
I mean, that would be something the developer could choose to use depending on the context of the interview, right?
So the point in the question that I asked is kind of this point, because if the court has to handle both a business name and a person name, then I imagine at least the PDF form would have one line, right? It wouldn't have first, middle, last, because it'd have to accommodate. So if we don't need the parts of the name, then it doesn't matter. But
Yeah, I think
Bryce
you're
said
right.
for e-filing you do, so.
Which
Or
hopefully will
you
be
might
most of our
just
forms.
use, the court might just use last name. I mean, if it's one field, maybe they only care about the last name. Maybe they only want the last name and a business. I mean, we don't know that, right?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, our interviews use the first name field if there's
For
if it's a
e-filing?
business. Bryce might do something different, but
For what?
we only fill in the first name attribute if it's a business. We use the first name attribute and we only fill that in
Oh,
if they say it's a business.
Yes, yeah. So we do know. So for e-filing, the thing I know for sure, it needs to be a completely different like object that we populate for if it's a business versus if it's a person. There are ways of, I think, just giving like full name for a person, but I don't, and so that's like a way that the standard says you should be allowed to, but I don't know if it will be respected or if it will just throw back an error saying you need to give us last name and it's not here. So I'll need to if that's a thing that we want to if it's a thing we want to look into, I can look into it. Might not be super priority for me, but it's a thing I can look into. Because and it's also kind of probably doesn't need to be super priority because e-filing is still sort of MVP two interviews and not a whole lot of them right now. So
Well, I think this is interesting. Like, I don't know if we have like a clear way to go yet, but I do think I could fix this one interview easily. Well, hopefully at least make it better experience by using landlord closer to the place people make a choice.
yeah.
But yeah, just it raised a question of like, is this input okay to use at all? And I think part of it is because people just, it's like the walking through the door effect, right? You click a button, something changes on the screen. You no longer have the same context that you did. You forget what you were thinking of.
Thing that you could do about this question, instead of what is your landlord's name, you could say, who is your landlord? What is your landlord, a business or a person? And then you could ask for name, but you could say, who is your landlord?
Good
That
point.
might be a better way to ask the question, the heading question.
I don't know if it's enough, but it's definitely an improvement over what's there. Like I think we should still also consider the stuff we've been talking about.
We'd want to put like the word landlord here and here.
Well, no,
not the we just want to use the word landlord. I mean,
if you were, so your solution, your first solution is instead of this, you'd replace this with your landlord, right?
Yeah.
Or and then the second solution would replace this with your,
I mean, actually, it's kind of, well, okay, if someone says person, this is the problem actually that they had. They clicked person, and then they saw first name, middle name, last name. So they thought it was about them.
Oh, right.
After they click person. So this is like harder to relabel.
And we can add another same thing if we have like name of business or organization. We can add another note that's like, what's the name of, or like what is the landlord's full name?
So like have a note here that goes above the four fields. You're saying, yeah. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, that could be. I think that makes a lot of sense. Just make it would look like a heading, wouldn't it? Just for chunking. Yeah.
Oops, actually wanted to edit that screenshot to annotate it a little bit so we can say where we just said things should go.
That feels like the same. This feels like a similar issue to the last one of like it's an issue of chunking. And making it it's not super clear what the name is referring to compared to all the other fields. So
you're talking about the signature issue.
We said we were going to change this as opposed to person.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
No, I was thinking in terms of the where someone put their full name and first name. That feels also like an issue of chunking. Of like they saw the field, the first name line, and if we had a little note before that was like,
Yeah.
what is your full name, and the different things that might help a bit. It might not, but it's slightly better, I feel. And at least it comes down to the same sort of issue of
Yeah.
showing all of these fields at once can be weird.
And would you do the same thing, Quentin? Just say first, middle, last?
I
Get rid of
think
the name again?
I do think just saying first, middle, last, people would understand that it meant a name.
Yeah. So your
And then-
heading would be, when you say add a heading here, you might actually, the text would be your explicitly your landlord's name.
Right.
The heading would be your landlord's name.
Yeah. And I
Okay,
want to
I'd
just
say-
generalize it here for this interview because
Yeah.
this point is on the assembly line, not just about landlords. But I think,
Right.
I mean, we can't really use the intrinsic name. We don't have to dive into that too much, but that's going to mess up translations. Even if the name is a good variable name in English, it won't be in other languages. So we need to let people pass a word, but then we use in the template in some way, I think. I think that would work because the translator can adjust the template so that wherever the word is inserted, it reads correctly for that language. I hope I'm right about that. Okay. Let's see. This is the last one. This was a really interesting one. Someone got to the signature screen here, and I don't think I can trigger it in this interview, but we have a lot of, let's see. One of our forms has a
Later, Quentin, I'd like to point out a visual thing about the form we were just looking at. But that doesn't have to be now.
well, you write it down so we don't forget.
All right.
I realize we're really using up all of our deep dive
Deep
time.
dive.
It's okay. I'm trying to think of the shortest form we have that has a signature field. I guess the TRO maybe is short enough. See, this is not too bad. This says, what kind of landlord do you have?
Yeah.
And this says, enter your full legal name. We must have encountered those usability problems or thought through them earlier. You can see the random things I type into my fields here. Okay. All right. So someone encountered this screen and they spent like quite a while on it, actually, like looking through it and parsing it. Okay, it says sign your forms. So they started trying to click here to drag and drop to try to start signing on this horizontal rule. And they were like, why is it just highlighting the words?
Why is it highlighting?
Yeah, they wanted to add their signature on their phone or on the screen by using the mouse to draw right here.
Oh, I
Where
see.
there's the pen
Yeah,
icon.
I got it. Yeah.
They totally missed these buttons. They didn't see those at all. I was like, oh, this actually is really
certainly-
poorly worded.
Yeah, certainly. I
Help
mean, what
people.
if you just had the heading be, instead of sign your forms are almost, the heading would be, your forms are almost ready. You
I-
need to sign.
I would say, how do you want to sign your forms?
Yeah, link it to the question.
Yeah.
I
that
think
makes
I
sense.
agree with Michelle's
Yeah.
solution. And then I realized we don't need these to be buttons. They should just be radio buttons as well. So that's easier to see that they're inputs because this is the only screen with the image buttons. That seems like an easy fix.
Yeah.
And then all of this text isn't right. It shouldn't say use the mouse or touchpad on your computer on this screen because you don't do that on this screen.
Right. Yeah.
Do we do this because we can't easily add text to the signature screens because Jonathan makes it difficult to add text to signature screens because he wants the signature thing to take up the whole screen?
That might have been why. Yeah, because actually, here's the other thing. As soon as they clicked this button, they had to sign. They had no idea what to do here. They're like, what? And they just were like, I'm just going to click next because I can't do anything here.
Huh. So if we had that little icon with the signature here as well, but it's funny because they did try to sign before where it said sign your forms.
Yep.
And then on that screen, they didn't.
Correct.
Yeah. I like this little decoration here on the right, though. We could put that on the sign below. Oh, it says sign below.
Says sign below. This is, I think it's the exact same text. So it says it uses the person's first name, repeats it. I didn't customize the screen at all.
Yeah. God.
I mean, it's one-off, right? Like, who knows if it's
Yeah.
enough that makes it a problem. But I do see like there's some clear things we can improve here.
Yeah.
Even if we want to keep the instructions here, we could say on the next screen you will. That might be
Because we
enough.
can't put those instructions on the next screen. You can only have the signature.
You really can't. Price is right about that.
You could put, there were some things that maybe you could do, like you could do an under.
You can do an under, and you
But
might be
for
able
the
to do
radio
it in the
buttons.
title. You might be able to do it in the title.
Yeah, so we can change text and the chain, please sign below, and we can change the
This is
text
what
below
happens
the
with
box.
see, on mobile.
Oh, what?
You
yeah,
use
they're not
very
gonna
small
do
amount of
that.
text.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
That should be
Yeah.
fixed upstream.
This
I don't
is
like
just a
that.
terrible screen, and in general, like I don't understand. No one else tries to make you use the whole screen to sign. Every signature tool, they give you a small box to sign, and people know how to read
Or-
it, and there's context
you
around
just-
it.
Or they let you tap into something and then it takes up the whole screen and then you sign it.
Yeah, that's true. That's the other way I've seen it, at least on. Yeah. I don't think this has to be like this weird special screen that doesn't work the way other screens do.
Mhm.
Maybe we should push back to Don Jonathan on being able to improve the screen a bit more.
Yeah.
But I think the immediate things
Maybe-
that we
maybe
could do
telling-
are improving the
yeah.
screen a bit more. But, yeah.
Maybe if we had somebody, maybe if you describe the usability test
Oh, yeah,
specifically,
absolutely.
so that
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think though, going back to this screen again is radio buttons. I mean, it's nice to have have the little phone and the icon for the computer, but Matt I think it was Matt sent me the usability or the evaluation that Nicole Theory and Principal did for Eleo and New Hampshire. And, because that was my whole struggle with this radio buttons thing. And she's saying, and she's using a lot of the Nielsen recommendations to just always use radio buttons and then a next, because that's what's familiar to people.
Yeah.
So
And we
maybe
can still
that,
do I think we could still do the little icons and the radio buttons
yeah,
too.
yeah.
You still can,
exactly.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the screen is really good. I'm glad I showed it to everybody because I would have forgotten.
Yeah, and
that
then
we
you
can't-
can, and then
we need the
this
instructions on the
language
screen.
you can put underneath your radio button choices, so you pick you have your radio button labels,
Oh,
and then the information about using the computer clarifies the sign on this computer. You know what I
right.
mean?
So if someone chooses sign on this computer, it will say sign on my computer with my mouse
Touchpad, yeah,
or
no,
touch screen.
yeah, or whatever, yeah, and then
And
sign
then
with
sign
your
on my
finger
phone
on your
will be-
smartphone.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, maybe you could just say is that what you're saying? Change the
Yeah.
label. You don't even need the extra information. Just change the label so it includes that information for the two
Right.
radio buttons. Yeah, that's a very good. I think that makes a lot of sense.
There was one more thing with the same test subject, which was just the sign in or register. They were a little confused by it, but I think they did not understand the word optional. They never picked that up. They read it on multiple screens and were like, this is making me think I'm going to lose my progress if I don't sign in or
Yeah.
register. And it's going to be a horrible process. And they described the challenges that they had trying to sign up for something and forgetting their password,
Mm-hmm.
and how they really didn't want to do it. And they said that multiple times and multiple screens. Anyway, but I don't think that's enough to be a usability issue. It's not a priority one for sure. But those three I highlighted, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a valid concern. If they don't sign in or register, then they won't really be able to save this unless they open in the same
Well,
session, in the same,
Well, it just
And is
was
it
that she
people-
started to feel like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be able to only click a few screens, and it's going to make me register. So she had a feeling of dread about
okay.
that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess I feel like I'm switching because if most people aren't out there like deleting their cookies in their browser most of the time, and so I feel like it is more of like I don't know. I don't know. We can talk about it more if it's not I think we might go into more. But I feel like I've had a similar conversation. Maybe it was with Matt on some of the language, the layout forms. But yeah, I don't know.
There might be a language change there eventually, but I think we're well over our time for this part. But it was good to see real world feedback.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't have thought of some of those. So yeah, but now in retrospect, it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, why didn't we think of that?
Which is of course how this works, right? It's like, I never would have thought of that, but now it's obvious.
Yeah.
It does make me think we really got to set up that user testing program, and seeing how we're able to do it with the remote Android and iPhone Zoom options in Zoom. Yeah, there's no real reason.
Yeah, Zoom has opened up a nice possibility there.
We did only get like 50% show up rate, so that's something to build in.
To be expected.
That's pretty good. 50% is pretty good.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Any other management things?
There was one other thing I said, but I don't think it's urgent. So
all right.
Okay. Can't remember.
Yeah, also, I don't know if necessarily management, but just so you know, David, Juanita had popped on the Friday call. And
Yes.
I think she still needs an email from you or something.
I actually I bumped it back up on my to-do list because I realized I hadn't done that. I was just going to show her a thing, a tutorial on DocAssemble, but yeah, it's on my list. But thanks for. All right, cool. Well then.